Mercedes could lose points, not because the engine trick was illegal, but because the FIA can now prove exactly how it was used. A hidden exploit. Completely invisible. Capable of delivering up to 130 extra horsepower in the final meters of the lap, where pole position is decided. No warning. No visible system. No obvious advantage. Just one impossible detail. The car wasn't slowing down when every other car had to. And that tiny difference was worth nearly 2/10 per lap. Enough to secure poles. Enough to control the grid. Enough to build an early championship lead. Until Ferrari saw it. One pattern. One anomaly. One question to the FIA. And everything changed. Because the moment the FIA started monitoring intent, the advantage didn't just disappear. It became evidence. And now, it's not just about losing performance. It's about what happens to everything Mercedes already achieved. Lap times. Results. Points. Which means one thing. This is no longer just a technical story. It's a fight to keep an entire championship alive. At first, it didn't look like a problem. It looked like perfection. Because Mercedes wasn't dominating every corner. They weren't clearly faster across the entire lap. But when it mattered most, they always delivered. The final seconds. The last straight. That final push to the line. That's where everything changed. And in Formula One, that's everything. Because those final meters decide pole position. They decide track position. They decide who controls the race before it even begins. But here's what made it so dangerous. There was no visible advantage. No aggressive engine mode. No obvious system anyone could point at. Just less loss. While every other car slowed down, Mercedes didn't. And that's almost impossible to detect. Because gaining speed is obvious. But not losing it. That hides in plain sight. So session after session, that hidden advantage kept working. Quietly. Consistently. Building results. Building confidence. Building a narrative that Mercedes was simply faster. But inside the data, something didn't add up. Because when Ferrari isolated the final meters, when they removed everything else from the lap, the pattern broke. Every other car followed the same behavior. Energy drops. Power fades. Speed falls. That's the system. That's physics. Except for one. Mercedes. Their speed held. Sometimes, it even increased. Exactly where it shouldn't. And that's the moment everything changes. Because in Formula One, if the data doesn't follow physics, there is always a reason. And once that reason starts to appear, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because patterns like that don't happen by accident. They happen because something is controlling them. And the moment you realize that, you're no longer looking at performance. You're looking at something hidden inside the car. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that, once exposed, doesn't just disappear. It puts everything at risk. And that's when Ferrari made the move that changed everything. They didn't try to copy it. They didn't hide it. They didn't experiment quietly in the background. They went straight to the FIA. And they asked one question. Is this allowed? Now that might sound simple. Routine. Something any team can do. But in Formula One, that question is explosive. Because the moment it's asked, everything is forced into the open. The FIA has to investigate. They have to go deeper than lap times. Deeper than performance. Into the system itself. Into the exact moment where the car stops behaving like every other car on the grid. And once they looked there, the pattern became obvious. Right before the finish line. At the exact point where every car should begin to lose speed. Mercedes did something different. They didn't follow the gradual drop. They didn't accept the limitation. They shut the system off. Completely. No transition. No resistance. And in that instant, everything changes. Because the moment the MGUK stops, it also stops recovering energy. It stops slowing the car down. It removes that invisible force every other driver has to fight. So the engine keeps pushing, but nothing is holding it back anymore. And in those final meters, that creates the advantage. Up to 130 horsepower, exactly where the lap is decided. The car crosses the line. The time is locked. The result is secured. And only then, the penalty activates. 60 seconds without the system. But it happens after the lap. When the driver is already slowing down. Cooling the tires. Heading back to the pits. So the penalty exists, but it changes nothing. And that's what made it so powerful. A rule designed to stop teams. Used perfectly, to help them. But that's also why it couldn't last. Because once the FIA understood the intent, the entire situation changed. This was no longer just clever engineering. It became a matter of control. Of predictability. Of safety. And from that moment on, everything Mercedes does is being watched. Every shutdown, every anomaly, every single trace in the data. And that's where the real danger begins. Because now, it's not just about the future. It's about everything that already happened. And this is where everything becomes truly dangerous for Mercedes. Because once the FIA starts looking into the past, they're not just analyzing performance. They're building a timeline. Every qualifying lap, every shutdown of the system, every single moment where the car behaved differently. And now, all of that data has a new meaning. Because before, it was just speed. Now, it's evidence. And that changes everything. Because this wasn't used once. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't random. It was repeatable, precise, triggered at the exact same point, lap after lap, across multiple race weekends. And that's where the risk explodes. Because if the FIA can prove that the system was deliberately used for performance gain, then every result connected to it becomes vulnerable. Not automatically erased, but no longer untouchable. And in Formula One, that distinction is everything. Because once results are questioned, they can be reviewed. And once they're reviewed, they can be changed. Lap times can be deleted. Qualifying positions can be reassigned. Race outcomes can shift. And in extreme cases, points can be taken away. Not just going forward, but from what has already been awarded. And that's the scenario now hanging over Mercedes. Because every tenth they gained in those final meters, every position secured, every advantage created, all of it came from a moment that is now under investigation. And that creates pressure instantly. Inside the team, inside the garage, inside every decision they make from this point forward. Because now, it's not just about being fast. It's about being clean, undeniable, beyond any doubt. And that's a completely different kind of pressure. Because performance can be improved, speed can be found, but legitimacy, once questioned, has to be proven. And that takes time. Time they don't have. Because the season doesn't stop. The next race arrives. The next qualifying session begins. And Mercedes has to perform under full scrutiny. Without the trick. Without the margin. Without the safety net. And with every move being watched. Every lap analyzed. Every result questioned. And that's where the real test begins. Because losing an advantage is one thing. But racing while everything you've already achieved is under investigation, that's something else entirely. And now, for the first time this season, Mercedes is not just fighting for speed. They're fighting to protect everything they've already built. And this is where everything reaches its final breaking point. Because once doubt enters the championship, it doesn't stay inside one team. It spreads. Across the paddock. Across the grid. Across every single result Mercedes has achieved so far. Because now, the question is no longer just technical. It's fundamental. What was real, and what was influenced? And that question is dangerous. Because Formula One is built on precision. On trust. On the belief that every lap represents pure performance. But when that trust is shaken, everything changes. Because now, every pole position is seen differently. Every gap is questioned. Every tenth is analyzed. Was it the car? Was it the driver? Or was it something hidden in the final meters? And that uncertainty changes how rivals react. Because Ferrari knows they didn't use it. They know their performance is clean. They know their data is untouched. So now, they push harder. With confidence. With clarity. With the certainty that what they gain is real. And that makes them more dangerous than ever. But for Mercedes, it's the opposite. Because now, they don't just need to be fast. They need to prove it. Every lap. Every session. Every weekend. And that pressure builds. Because in Formula One, when you have something to prove, you drive differently. You think differently. You take fewer risks. Or sometimes too many. Trying to silence the doubt. Trying to show that the speed is still there. But that's where mistakes appear. Because pressure doesn't just affect performance. It distorts it. And when performance is distorted, the gap grows. Not always instantly. Not always visibly. But inevitably. And that's where the championship begins to shift. Because if Mercedes drops even slightly, if those final tenths disappear, if the results stop matching what we saw before, then the narrative changes completely. Not slowly. Instantly. Because in Formula One, momentum is everything. And once it's gone, it's incredibly hard to recover. But here's the final truth. Because this moment is bigger than Mercedes. This is the moment where everything hidden becomes visible. Where performance is no longer influenced by something nobody can see. Just the car, the driver, the execution, nothing else. And that's why what comes next matters more than anything we've seen so far. Because now, there are no excuses. No hidden margins. No invisible advantages. Just reality. And reality in Formula One is ruthless. Because it exposes everything. Strengths, weaknesses, truth. And when that truth finally shows itself, there will be no debate. No interpretation. No doubt. Only one answer. Who was actually fast? And who was only ahead because of something that no longer exists? And now, we reach the moment that defines everything. Because sooner or later, the FIA makes a decision. Not a warning. Not a suggestion. A decision. And when that happens, everything becomes real. Because if penalties are applied, they don't just affect one session. They don't just affect one race. They rewrite the story. Lap times disappear. Positions change. Results shift. And points vanish. Not gradually. Instantly. And that's the part no one inside Mercedes can ignore. Because this is no longer about losing an advantage. It's about losing what that advantage created. Every pole secured in those final meters. Every position gained by fractions. Every point built on those results. All of it at risk. And that's what makes this moment so brutal. Because in Formula One, you can recover performance. You can bring upgrades. You can fix problems. But you cannot easily recover lost points. Once they're gone, they're gone. And that's what turns this into a potential turning point for the entire championship. Because imagine this scenario. Mercedes loses even a portion of those points. Suddenly, the standings change. Suddenly, the gap disappears. Suddenly, teams like Ferrari are not chasing anymore. They're leading. And that changes everything. Strategy, risk, momentum. Because now, Mercedes is no longer defending from the front. They're chasing from behind. And chasing in Formula One is a completely different game. More aggressive, more desperate, more exposed. And that's where mistakes multiply. Because when you're trying to recover something that was taken away, every decision carries more weight. Every risk feels necessary. Every lap becomes critical. But here's the final twist. Because even if the FIA doesn't strip everything, even if the penalties are smaller than expected, the damage is already done. Because the illusion is gone. The advantage is gone. The trust is under pressure. And the entire grid knows it. They know Mercedes has lost something. They know the gap is smaller. They know the fight is real again. And that's when Formula One becomes dangerous. Because once rivals believe they can win, they don't hold back. They push harder. They take more risks. They attack every opportunity. And that's exactly what Mercedes now has to face. Not just a rule change. Not just scrutiny. But a grid that is no longer intimidated. A grid that sees weakness. And in this sport, that's when everything shifts. So now, everything comes down to one final reality. No tricks. No loopholes. No invisible advantages. No protection. Just performance. Pure. Measured. Exposed. And in that moment, there is nowhere left to hide. Because the next race will not just show who is fast. It will show who was truly fast all along. And whether Mercedes can survive this moment, or whether this is the exact point where their entire season begins to collapse.